Hi everyone, my name's Eagle. I'm the I'm the publisher, I'm the line editor for No Earth Comics, and I'm also one of the writers, and I'm an artist. And so I'm going to be talking to you with a lot of different hats on today, and since I'm behind on a lot of things right now, I'm going to go ahead and do some artwork while we're talking. I can still see your comments and such, so anything that you've got that you want to put up a question about or anything like that, go right ahead. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about social and political issues in comics and how those should be handled. And the first thing we need to remember is that as creators, what we're wanting to do is reach as large an audience as possible. That our market saturation is very important to us because that translates into sales and that translates into money in our pockets. Okay, I'm checking the camera right now, seeing how we're looking here. Sounds okay. So this has been a rough couple of weeks for Marvel Comics, and they have found themselves embroiled in 3 different controversies in a period of about as many weeks. And the first one being when a Marvel executive proceeded to fan shame the fans for not wanting diversity or women characters. And I've addressed this in a couple of other videos, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. The second was when one of Marvel's artists proceeded to hide anti-Semitic and anti-Christian messages in his artwork. And I've addressed that in a video, and I'm not going to go into that here. The third is this week's revelation that Captain America has always been evil. And the fact that I am doing a Captain America piece of art right now should pretty much let you know where I come down on that issue, so I don't need to go into that here either. What I do want to go into is how to do this stuff in a way that not only does not alienate fans, but actually gains you fans. First thing we have to remember is that we live in a polarized country, and I'm going to go into some background information here because I feel that's the best way to get my point across. I started looking at Twitter almost a year ago. I hadn't had the time or the inclination to look at it before then. But the very first thing I did was I found all of my favorite creators and I subscribed to them. I went on a spree, people. I'm telling you, I was doing Google searches. I was looking through my comic book collection. I was going through Wikipedia. I was going through Comic Vine. I was going through everything I could to find any of the creators that I really liked, and using that as a basis for who I subscribe to on Twitter. And then came the gear up for the election. I voted. I did not vote for either of the 2 mainstream candidates. the amount of political trash coming across my Twitter feed caused me to start unfollowing people. Because all of a sudden nobody was talking about comics. They were talking about politics. And they were talking about politics in divisive, hateful, hurtful ways. Now then, as I already stated, I didn't vote for either of the two major candidates, so I literally did not have a dog in the race. But what I did have was a sense of sorrow over the loss of dignity, over the loss of politeness, and over the loss of basic human respect for each other. I'm going to paraphrase the following quotes, but you're going to wind up recognizing people who said a variation on them, and you're going to think I'm talking about that person. But in point of fact, the quotes that I'm paraphrasing usually came from 4 or 5 different people. So I'm not talking about a specific person. I'm talking about a pattern and a sentiment I'm talking about a sentiment that was common, and in some ways still is. I saw creators, artists and writers, bullying their fans over political positions. This is wrong in so many different ways that I don't even have the words to express it. I'm going to try, though, because that's one of the reasons you're listening to me, is because I'm going to try to express my opinion. The piece of paper that I am working on is worth about $1. You can buy a pack of 24 of them for about $20, sometimes cheaper, depending on the loss of quality you're willing to take. So we'll call this piece of paper $1. I just scribbled on it. I have now ruined this piece of paper. My scribbling has no intrinsic value. There is nothing that I have done that has enhanced the quality and the value of this paper. In fact, if you're not a fan of my artwork and my artwork style, then what I've done is ruin this particular piece of paper. And it's no longer worth $1. If you are a fan of my artwork and style, then this piece of paper will be worth about $100 to $150 by the time I'm done. Notice I said if you're a fan of my style. The only thing that makes what I am doing have value is my fans. Now, I've been doing artwork for a number of years. I've done gallery shows. I've sold numbers of paintings. But in the end, my artwork is worth nothing without fans of that artwork. It has no intrinsic value of its own. I'm writing comics that I sell for money. Those comics have no intrinsic value of their own until I get a fan who's willing to pay me money to read what I've written. So the idea of disrespecting my fans, the few fans that I have, the idea of disrespecting them by telling them that I don't want their money if they disagree with me, is so utterly alien and foreign to me that I don't even have the words to describe the feeling other than just saying it is flat out wrong. So let's take that sentiment and let's write it a little bit larger, shall we? As a comic book company, because I've just spoken to you as a creator, now let me speak to you as a publisher. As a comic book publisher, I do not want to sell to a particular demographic. I want to sell to whoever I can. And therefore, the more people my comics appeal to, the happier I'm going to be as a publisher. As a comic book company, the happier I'm going to be. So I'm going to distill what I have told a number of my writers into some wisdom for you. There are ways to write and present what you want to present without alienating your readers. And there are ways to make your reader feel like they have been entertained instead of being preached to, that they have spent their money wisely, and that you have not belittled them. If you are anywhere to, I'd say about 70% of the political spectrum towards the right, there are certain writers at Marvel that become unreadable. There's a couple of writers at DC that become almost unreadable. Because you are going to come away from that comic feeling slighted, feeling insulted. And this represents a majority of the country. This represents a number of people on the left come away from these feeling slighted and insulted because they happen to share a few beliefs with the demographic that these writers are targeting. This is not the way to sell comics. This is not the way to make people feel like they are included in the comic book audience. This is enough to make them feel like this comic is intended for somebody else. Let's talk X-Men for a moment. The X-Men were created as an answer to the Doom Patrol, but they were also created as an allegory. And they were an allegory for racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, depending on the different writers. But they've always been an allegory for otherness and for prejudice. And people from all parts of the political spectrum read X-Men and enjoy it because it doesn't target them specifically. Instead, it speaks in terms of allegory. So this is the first way that you can deal with a political or a social situation in your comics, is do it in allegory. If you want the master class in dealing with allegory as a way of dealing with social and political issues, I recommend the 79 episodes of the original Star Trek series. Just about every episode was dealing with allegory for something. Well, crap. There's my first mistake, people. I will take care of that in a few minutes. But allegory is a fantastic way of handling a touchy subject. because you can do it without ticking people off. You can do it without alienating people. What's more, when you remove a subject from its emotional language that the direct conversation is associated with, you stand a better chance of getting people to think about the subject rationally. There's a Star Trek episode where both of the aliens trying to kill each other are half black and half white, and the crew can't figure out why they keep talking about each other as if they were wildly different. And then somebody happens to notice that the side of them that is half black or half white is different. And that's the total difference that these two see in each other. It's a form of the argument of reductio ad absurdum. You reduce things to the absurd, and you can point out either the truth or the falseness of an argument by doing so. And allegory makes it easy to do that. So allegory is the first weapon in your arsenal when you're dealing with these types of touchy subjects in a comic book. Now, by the way, if you're one of those people that is doing an outright political comic book, in other words, if Gary Trudeau happens to watch this, you're excused from this particular discussion. If you are doing an underground political cartoon, you don't need to worry about any of what I'm talking about, because your readers are there for the political viewpoint. But if you're writing a mainstream or an attempt to be a mainstream comic, then you need to realize that alienating 40% of your readers is not a good idea. Alienating 50% of your readers is a worse idea. Alienating 60 or 70% of your readers is an absolutely horrible idea. But even alienating 20% of your readers is just a ridiculously bad idea, especially if you are trying to make your living off of the number of sales you get. If you're not being paid a flat rate, if you're trying to make a living off of the eventual sales and royalties, then alienating a good portion of your audience is just painfully stupid. And yet we've been watching that happen. And some people have been watching it gleefully. Some people have been giggling a lot about this. But me, I've been watching it and I'm not happy about it. I think it's sad to watch comic books go this particular route. So, allegory is your first way of dealing with this. The next way of dealing with this, and this is the one that's going to be hardest for people, but it's the most effective, is you deal with the subject head on, but you recognize that there are two sides to the subject. And you deal with it as if both sides are valid. Now then, it doesn't matter whether you agree with the other side or not. You deal with it with the respect and the decency of presenting both sides of the argument. Now then, it's also your chance to present an argument convincingly. But you don't straw man this. You don't create a false narrative so that you can knock it down. You play this straight. If you want examples of this in action, I highly recommend a run on Green Arrow and Green Lantern back in the 60s called Hard Traveling Heroes. And in it, you had the arch conservative of Green Lantern traveling with the socialist leftist of Green Arrow as the two of them traverse the country trying to help people. And some of comics' most powerful moments come from that series. If you haven't checked it out, find a copy. I'm betting Comixology has it, but find a copy. Find an old graphic novel and read this. This is worth reading simply as a text on how to do social and political interaction in a comic book and do it well. And you do it by presenting both sides. And you do it with an intellectual honesty that a lot of writers today just don't have. They honestly believe that they are so right and the other side is so obviously wrong that there's no need to present a balanced viewpoint. Well, guys, I realize most comic book readers are on the liberal side. I realize most comic book creators are on the liberal side. So there's been a lot of people proceeding to trounce Trump in comics, online, the whole bit. And the feeling is, well, can't everyone see that anybody who supported Trump is wrong? And my answer to that is, the man's still polling 40% approval rating, which means, just doing simple math here, which means 2 out of every 5 people think he's right. Are you really willing to alienate that 2 out of 5 people to poke fun at a sitting president and not collect their money? And by the way, not accomplish anything because everybody who you know already agrees with you. You want to do something good? The man has a lot of foibles. If you're going to portray him in your comic book, if you're going to portray his policies in your comic book, do them honestly. Show some of the good things he's done, and then have fun with the bad things. But learn how to show both sides of the issue. Now then, this is a lot harder than allegory. Allegory is pretty easy. What to avoid? You avoid ham-handed, heavy-fisted allegory. One of the comic book companies recently had one of their longtime villains basically re-quoting Trump quotes. That was ham-fisted. That was something that turned off people. I don't want to read politics of that nature. And as I said, I didn't vote for the man. There was a meme going around for a while that said, gun to your head, Clinton or Trump. And the bottom of the meme says, I let the gun go off. That was about the way I felt about the election. But just because I don't like him does not mean that I'm going to use him as a scapegoat for my comic. Now then, I'm concentrating on him at the moment because this is a visible example that everybody can relate to. But I don't want you to take away from this the idea that I'm talking about that. I'm using it as an example. I'm using it to point out a pattern of behavior on the part of comic book creators. We as comic book creators have a long tradition of political statement in our comics. If you don't understand that, take a look at what the ethnicity of the people who created the first comic book heroes were and why they were doing it. And you'll start understanding that putting political and social commentary into comics is a long tradition. But it's also something that has to be done with finesse. It's something that has to be done with a certain amount of respect for your audience, even audience that you disagree with, because these people are what? They are your fans. They are the people who pay your wages. They pay your salary. They pay your royalties. You want these people to buy your product because they are the way you make a living. And so even if you don't agree with them, even if you don't respect their opinion, you still need to respect them as people. You need to respect them as customers, and you need to respect their viewpoints to the fact that they have a right to their own viewpoint. Civility and respect should be something that you consciously consider every single time that you sit down to write a political or social issue into one of your comics. It should be something that you consider every time you think about the way that you're going to draw something, the way that you're going to create a visual for a comic. And it's something that we need to see more of, because we're seeing a lot of divisiveness in comics. We're seeing a whole lot of people who are feeling like they are not receiving respect. And we don't need to be those people. We don't need to be the people that are making people feel disrespected. We don't need to be the people that are making people feel like they are being alienated. There's enough of that in the media. There's enough of that in entertainment. There's enough problems. There's enough divisiveness. We need to be the people that even when we are exploring something that we feel passionate about, even when we're exploring something that we feel strongly about, we need to be the people that actually show that there's more than one way to look at something. That we're not a hive mind. That we are individuals and that we have rights to our opinions. We have rights to our beliefs. And we have the right to be entertained without being preached to, without being beat over the head with the stick of properness. And that's what I'm saying here, is avoid alienating your audience, avoid alienating the people who are supporting you. And thanks for tuning in, thanks for listening, and I'll be uploading this to YouTube later today, and thanks for sitting here while I did some work. Appreciate it.